I had the pleasure of going to my high school reunion back in Chatham in this old building, Chatham Collegiate Institute, which has for a number of years now been closed and sold and not available to us for our reunion. So instead, we gathered downtown Chatham, the revitalized downtown Chatham, in a bookstore that was fronted by one of those board game rooms with crokinole and other games on the table, and a lovely coffee bar that served salty caramel cheesecake and ice cream milkshakes that were way too thick to suck through a paper straw. So we gathered in this bookstore and we waited as each person came in and went through that, I'm sure you can relate, ritual of peering into the faces of others, looking for signs of familiarity and hoping that maybe we'd be recognized. And of course, we could see that in the eyes of one another, remembering what everyone else looked like and knowing that someone was looking at us, remembering that we're all still that fearful teenager back in high school. The occasion for the reunion was really a book launch. One of our classmates from however many, about 40 years ago, if I'm counting, to count, Ray Robertson, a recognized Canadian author, he's 12 or 13 books under his belt buckle, was launching his new book, and I'm not ashamed to plug it here, Estates Large and Small, story about a used bookstore owner in Toronto dealing with the challenges of rental hikes and all of the things that go with the business, especially during a pandemic. And Ray read to us the opening 4 or 5 pages of this, his latest novel, and then he engaged the group of mostly his peers from high school in Q&A, which you have to appreciate the danger of doing so, because Ray, along the way over the years, has added some of his high school peers as characters in his book, sometimes positive, sometimes not. But we had an excellent time just connecting with one another. Ray had released a book during the pandemic, and so he read some excerpts from that also. A book of haiku, and I have to add for Ray's part that he made sure to read the disclaimer at the beginning of the book, "I am not a poet." And so these attempts at poetry are a little bit lighthearted or maybe a little heavy-hearted. And so he read this one: "Too intelligent to be happy, too wise to be sad, he poured himself another glass of wine." I went to the family reunion, the high school reunion, and the book launch, trusting that I'd have something pop up during yesterday that I could use during the sermon. And when Ray read this short bit of poetry, I had to jot down a note, because as I heard it, it just resonated with some of the words that we heard in the scripture passage, the letter that Paul wrote to the church at Corinth. And we'll get to that, but before we do, I want to unpack this a bit. I think it's rather profound. I think you can understand the first line. Sometimes you can, what's the saying? Too smart for your own good? That sometimes folk who are just way too intelligent, who are always analyzing the world and perhaps going so far as to deconstruct it, they never get to enjoy the life that they live. Never get to experience that happiness, because even a hint of happiness is something that they want to analyze, and why perhaps am I fooling myself into happiness? Too intelligent to be happy. I think we can understand that one. But too wise to be sad. Wisdom it's not just intelligence, it's smarts made practical for everyday living. And so someone who is wise will be practical enough to know, you don't need to live with a scarcity of happiness in your life, but just wise enough not to be sad. And so these first two lines, they kind of paint this, again, that analogy of following signs down the road, that on one side you got a gravel shoulder of happiness, and another side of the road you have a gravel shoulder of sadness. And life is kind of like driving down that road and making sure that, your tires don't get caught up spinning in one side or the other of the gravel. Too much happiness, maybe I'll veer off the road. Too much sadness, the same thing. What Ray offers here is, well, how do you steer through these two sides of the road? He poured himself another glass of wine. I think this can be interpreted a couple ways. Maybe you're the kind of person who, when you're drinking your wine, living life metaphorically, you're doing so to celebrate life, to enjoy its goodness. Or for other people, when they're trying to navigate between these two rough shoulders, they're having a glass of wine maybe to dull the pain and the uncertainty. And maybe there's a little bit of both of those habits in each of us. But I thought it was an interesting way of just pondering life. Can I be happy? Well, can I be sad? What is my outlook on life to make sure that I'm not veering one way or the other? Well, do I set out to enjoy what's beautiful in life, what's tasty, or do I find ways to dull the pain, work too hard, or use substances? Well, who knows? It's something for us to ponder. Well, this is what Paul writes. And I want to repeat what I mentioned during the children's time about Paul was writing, when he writes this bit about signs, just keep in mind that Paul's Jewish, and Paul was raised in a culture where you discerned God's call in your life by looking for signs, looking for miracles. And that's a faithful way of trying to figure out, how do I navigate this road? One side of the road. But Paul, also educated, he went off to university somewhere in Greek culture, and he also understood the Greek understanding of wisdom, and that wisdom and intelligence is supposed to save you. Paul understands that in his world and the world of his listeners, these are the two gravel shoulders of the road when it comes to navigating a relationship with God. Do I find God through signs and wonders? Do I find God through my own exploration of wisdom? And Paul says, you know what? There is a third way that's offered to us as followers of Jesus Christ. We proclaim Christ crucified a stumbling block, or the Greek word, a scandal. He makes this very powerful argument that